please.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one point that Professor Troiani had made about populism. Populism isn't any different than a cuisine for a country, or personality for a country. Different countries have different personalities, like Russia has different personalities from the Italians. And even among Western democracies, Germans are different from Italians and so on. Now, in American history, our populism, there's always been a theme of populism in American history. For example, in Montana in the late 1800s, a Republican governor and a Republican legislature passed a law which withstood until about 2 years ago, and it was struck down by the United States Supreme Court, that limited political contributions to a low amount because they felt they corrupted the politics of the state. And that was Republican government, Republican legislature, part of the populist movement. When Roosevelt came about, Teddy Roosevelt, in a very rich patrician family, he took on the trusts, and that was part of the populist movement. He broke up the concentration of power that they had over the United States. So in America, the populist movement in America, unlike possibly other countries, has served as a renewal, and it has not been this negative aspect that people now want to associate to fascism. This is now in the United States, unfortunately, as part of our decline. If you disagree with somebody, he's either a fascist or a communist or whatever, so you're debating his ideas. Now, with regard to the Trump election, as Moynihan said, we're all entitled to our opinions, but not our own facts. Truths are truths, facts are facts. Now, people have made a big deal. I was a political science major at Cornell in government, then I went to medicine, but from what I remember, a little bit I remember from way back.
But is this going to be a question?
No, but this is one point I want to make, because, people make presentations, and quite frankly, just one point.
Okay.
This election, okay, we have a federal system. Now, if we break down by county, President Trump, this populist, won 80 or 85% of all the counties in America. Now, the final point I want to make is that representative of the country, or is Manhattan or Berkeley representative of the people of America? I think we can argue that the rules, we knew what they were. It's a federal system of government, state by state, county by county. Overwhelmingly, the people, for whatever reason, voted for Trump. The other point I want to make is the arrogance of people saying that people that voted for Trump because somebody has a PhD and he automatically thinks they're smarter than anybody else, they're ignorant. Well, I have an MD, I'm Ivy League educated, and I happen to have voted for Trump, and I don't think I'm stupid. And I don't think all the other professionals, including college-educated white women who voted for Trump, the majority were educated. So these are the points I want to make. I mean, some things we have to debate and some things we don't.
Right, I understand. Maybe somebody has a question for one of the speakers.
Yeah. Well, my question is, you have to, my question is, populism is not fascism in America. I don't know what it is in Argentina.
Well, I think that point was made.
And I don't know what it is in Spain, and I don't know what it is in fascist Portugal. If that was a populist movement. But in America, that has not been the case.
Right.
Of anybody that's studied government or political history.
Yeah, okay. I gather that's just that's an opinion. Is there anybody who has a question for the speaker?
It's a fact.
Yes. Please, go right ahead, yes.
I had a question for Professor Finkelstein. I was wondering, speaking of this question of American populism and other kinds of populism, how he would define Bernie Sanders, and if that's in this continuum you were talking about of populism.
Yes, I mean,
Please stand up.
You have to stand up.
well, I mean, I don't think he was a populist. I mean, this is another use of the term. I mean, that is, the fact that he was addressing popular demands or trying to connect to popular demands doesn't make necessarily him a populist. I will say this, I mean, and this is why it's so important to understand populism in government as opposed to an opposition movement. I mean, I don't know what would have happened, but in order to have, and this is a key dimension, in order to have a populist situation, you not only need all this talk about elites and leaders and anti-politics, but also you need leaders. Leaders that believe they replace they can talk for the people and eventually replace them. Leaders that are mythically construed as the voice of the people and so on. So once you have that, I mean, you are having part of the main, I think, in my view, historical ingredients. And as far as I know, Sanders was not presenting himself as a kind of embodiment of the people, the incarnation of the people. Of course, this goes back to the monarchic model. I mean, the idea that a leader can represent, not only can represent the people, but the fact that a leader, as Hugo Chavez said, is the people. He famously said, I am no longer myself. I am the people, and now Chavez, we are millions. There are millions of Chavez. And in a way, you have a similar situation with the little Trumps and so on, and of course this is reminiscent of fascism as well. Now the difference I think is that in fascism, it doesn't need to be confirmed, this idea that the leader is the people, doesn't need to be confirmed by elections. Like if you could ask Hitler or Mussolini, like they will find this to be inconceivable. Because the idea will be that they are mythically, I mean, or innately, or authentically the people, and they don't need to be confirmed. Now, the ambivalence of populism and its more democratic dimension is the fact that they need to confirm that by election. The weird part, the undemocratic dimension, is that a leader doesn't need elections to be a leader. In a way, then, it's a plebiscitary notion. The elections act as a confirmation of the leadership divine form of sovereignty. And this is the crazy part, because also a monarch doesn't need to be confirmed with elections. So that's why it's a kind of amalgamation of anti-democratic and democratic dimensions.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, no, I think it's connected with part of this question with Professor Pakistan, but also Troiani, they show that showing of the percentage of what populist parties got in the last 10 years, I think, in Europe. And they were about between 15–25% moving that. And then, of course, Professor Troiani reminded us that was the numbers that fascists, the Mussolini had, the Hitler had, and so on. And if you do a calculation, it's exactly the number that Trump had. Because how many people voted in the United States that have the right, then you divide it for half, actually he lost the popular vote, and you end up to be about 25% of the vote. That's how he was elected, so he was the second. My question is, I think if you say, but the difference between populism and fascists is that populists don't attack the democratic rules, actually. It does, accept to lose, you say, something like that.
That's a possibility. I mean, I'm an historian, so I don't know what is going to happen. What I will say is that...
Yeah, no, but that's exactly the question is, on the beginning, is it possible that before they reach power, also, I mean, the fascists, the Nazis, the Leninists, all you want, they are all populists. But then when you realize that they were also fascists, it's too late.
No, because I mean whenever they, I don't agree with that. I don't think they defended the democratic game even when they were positioning themselves as in elections. I mean that is a historical fact. They were not defending elections or the legitimacy of elections. I mean if you read them, they are not saying that. Whereas in someone like Trump or Perón, you will say this is the kernel of our political understanding of things. Now, what is interesting is, and this is what Nadia Urbinati said, this important Italian political philosopher, she says that this is a disfiguration of democracy. What happens is not that democracy is destroyed, but rather that democracy is disfigured, it is undermined. I mean, you have fewer separation of powers, you have fewer means of people participation in the political game. Because what is interesting is that there is a feeling of participation. People vote for Trump, for example, because they feel they now participate. But now Trump asks, or a typical populist leader will ask them, and this is interesting what Senator Benvenuto was saying, like, I mean, he is asking them to follow his command. I mean, the idea would be that I know best what is good for you. Now you voted for me, now sit back in the back seat and I drive. I mean, this is the model. So, so this is very different to other forms of democracy. I mean, that's why, I mean, many people are describing this, and I am among them, as an authoritarian form of democracy. Now, can it cease to be? Can it go for dictatorship? We might be seeing this in Venezuela right now, we are seeing this in Turkey's Erdogan in Turkey. Now, what I will say is that that is the moment in which it ceases to be. It's no longer populist. It's something else, perhaps dictatorship.
But
Let Professor Troiani have a response.
I think we need some other concepts to be put in the debate. First of all, when we say democracy, probably all of us have a certain definition of democracy in mind, which is not necessarily shared by all of us. Let's say that all of us say democracy, Athens, well, Athens was a racist, women were at home, and even worse, there were just a few democrats, all the other were ilots working everywhere. They were aristocracy, aristocratic order of land. Stop. But we used to say, this is our model of democracy. So a lot of stories circulates about democracy. Let's make clear that. So what we need more, we didn't evoke the word identity during our debate. Populism has a lot to do with identity, because it gives an identity. This play 1-1-1 means we are one. What I said is untrue. I mean, it's true, but it's untrue. We are many, probably, and one. And populism plays a lot about identity. It gives an identity. It requests an identity. But pay attention. It does that without using democratic rules, because what is, I would say, very popular in populist movement, to have no internal rules, no congresses, no internal democracy. They don't need, simply because it's charisma which is working. So they simply don't need. And this is another matter. Rules. So when we say America, the identity of America, say many, it's constitution and amendments. This is law, so the force of law. Are you sure that all societies in the world are ready to accept what we are saying? Certainly not the ethnical-based or religious-based populations. They don't even need constitutions. And the same happens with populist movements. They don't need special rules. Berlusconi dominated Italian politics for years, the first decade probably without celebrating any Congress, or more or less. I don't know if it was a decade or 8 years. But you understand? And he was in power, he was head of government. So the different perception of rules is important. Another concept, time. If you have someone in power for 20, 30, or 40 years, or for 1 year, or, as is the case of Mr. Trump, 100 days, how may I judge a politician in 100 days? I would be foolish. I have to keep waiting for the end of the mandate and have a comprehensive judgment. So this is another aspect. When we talk about populism, are we talking about populist in pectore, governing, or through Peron, of course, we may have a judgment, and Taksin in Thailand, we make, etc. But time. The scale is another problem. All the phenomena have a certain scale, a certain amount. Even nuclear explosion has a scale. There are less or more. And so populism and fascism. Here comes the scale. Maybe that fascism is the optimum of populism, the highest level of populism, or is another story. Certainly, Italian fascism was traditional way of approaching politics at the beginning, because it came from mass party. Our populist party, mass party, as we use, communist, socialist, Christian Democrats, Popular Party of Europe, they were Christian Democrats, they call it simple, or are they a liquid phenomenon, powdery phenomenon? Many and the leader, they don't need organization rules, congresses, etc. In fact, and here I see a huge difference between fascism and populist parties. I finish. I guess that probably the Thai, it's far away from our culture. But what happened in Thailand, and what is still happening, between a monarch, was the nation, loved by people, Taksim movement, mobilizing the poorest of the country from the north. They were the poorest, exploited. So he was fighting for good, let's say. But what kind of roots he adopted? Not democratic roots, internal wealth, once again a businessman going to politics, violence, at a certain moment he used violence. He was ousted, he was out of the game. Not because the roots were necessarily bad, he was even in power, the sister was in power, but because certain elements he used were not democratic or not legal, were illegal. And I finish, this is one key point. Populist movements are out of a certain game because they are innovators, not precisely because they are criminals.
Okay, thank you. Now, I don't know what the schedule is, Mario.
Yeah,
Not, we have time for more?
5 minutes.
Oh, okay, good, very good.
Today's another question.
Yes,
Yeah, one of the things that comes through from the three papers and the initial comments is that in the background, there seems to be kind of a defense of what used to be called the values of la borghesia. That is to say, populism, because of its possible association or transformation into a fascism, it's something which is not democratic, it may not protect the middle class, we call it here. But one of the phenomena, so using an old terminology, this is, the middle class protecting itself against the insurgents from the bottom. But what is peculiar instead about what's happening the last 15 years, at least in this country, is that this populism is something that cuts vertically through the various population strata, the various social strata. I mean, and some of the elements that have been explained by Napolitano, but and also by Troiano, but when you just mention identity, when he also mentioned the various components that go into the what did you call it, the anticorp, you know? It seems that the elements of however we define populism, which are present in the elite, in the aristocracy, in the anticorpi, there's some elements of that, and into the underclass, which of course the archetype here will be the pre-1789 le peuple, you know, who just take pitchforks and charge. So it's a very, very complex phenomenon, and the point is that the word populus, das folk, I mean, you know, it speaks to our humanness and the problems that we have. So it's very seducing, but maybe that's why it's so elusive to nail it.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Well, having read Senator Benvenuto's paper, he touches exactly on this and the issue of the middle class. He refers to Aristotle, the middle being the most desirable and whatnot. But then, with the issue of globalization, you have the waning or the disappearance of the middle class. And this is the problem that comes into the picture when he talks about, you know, with globalization, it's a new deal. It's everything, all the rules are off. And we now have to think in different terms. That is covered by Benvenuto. Is that all right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure if anybody else has another question. Yes.
Simple question. It was for the first presenter. He quoted something in Financial Times that said.
Could you speak a little more loudly, please? I can't hear.
Yeah. So at the beginning, in the first presenter, Professor Troiani, he quoted something that said the elite need to respond intelligently to the populism. So I have friends who voted for Trump, who voted for Bernie, who voted like a variety, and I also talk to online forums. I talk to people about this. And for the Trump supporters, when the elite responded, like defining elite, I don't know if it's higher political people, like previous presidents, they said don't vote for him, or higher ups and like millionaires, like I don't know Mark Cuban, who said don't do this. The general consensus for the Trump supporters, as soon as that happened, or general populism, that they responded, they're like, oh, you see, they're against us, now it just increases. my question is there actually a way to respond to this intelligently? Because whatever response the elite gives, it just fuels populism. It just, like for the Trump, like as soon as any of them said something, it was, no, that's wrong immediately. Is there any way to get, like, to talk to them, like, let's say to respond to them? Or is it inevitable that they would just rise to power, like Trump did?
Sure, well, Professor Ryan, can we have a comment on this? No, nothing? Yes.
I think we have to be enough humble to understand that social sciences, political sciences, are very new. Here we are in geometry and physics. This starts, it starts from 500, we are witnessing 500 before Jesus Christ, etc. Our study starts 1 century ago, 8 years ago, or more or less, beside philosophers, but they were not. They didn't pretend to be political scientists. They were philosophers. Just to make very humble what we say. We have a lot of questions, a lot of troubles with that, and very few certain answers. That's why I say we have to be humble on that, and honest. Now, I come to your question. I remember to have read with suspicion at the beginning, then with surprise, and then with understanding, a book of 15 years ago, talking about the forgotten people in New Deal. Because I was one of people looking at New Deal as a bit, president helping poor people to recover, and then fighting for democracy in Europe, etc., etc. And the book was on people who lose during New Deal, which was another way around to look at the crisis of the 30s. And they were the forgotten people. I think the key question to answer to your elite are the forgotten people. Forgotten people today want to be recognized, to have an identity, and be back to history. On my opinion, I said they were choosing wrongly someone who will not take care of, at all of them. This is my opinion. Maybe I am wrong. That's why I say we may comment at the end of the story, not at the beginning. For the time being, I think that it's false. People claiming for power is destined to be elite, by definition. So if I am asking your vote to be in power against the elite as such, as a myth, it's crazy, because I am requesting to become elite myself. That's why I say strange idea circulates on that. I think I answered to you.
Thank you.
One final question.
No, it's not a question, it's again because I understood well. The only point is trying to understand if somebody is populist or not, if respect the democratic rule also for the future, at least understanding it. I know there's one thing, for example. The President Trump, before he became president, he was attacking pillars of the constitutional order in this country, for example, the First Amendment. And during his speech, his inauguration speech, he says some phrases that whether we can call it populist or something, but I call it fascist, and not because he used the word in these hours, but because he said something that was, I quote, but I don't remember exactly the phrase, but he said, at one point, it looks probably his abandoned phrase, he said, in this country, American first, he was explaining that, he said, in this country, when we finally will all agree and believe without having people criticize it within the country, I'm not talking about external. This is obbedire essere one opinion. This country was founded with the First Amendment and everything on the clashing of ideas, on the dialectic of ideas. So somebody there on a speech, an inauguration speech, tell you, we will become strong again, America great again, when we will all think alike. I think that's fascist.
Well, maybe is it time for lunch?
Yeah.
Yes.